Hello. My talk today is about how we made a bilingual map of the city of Swansea and its adjacent village, the Mumbles. Although I work at the University of Bristol, I've lived in Swansea for the last 17 years. So when the Historic Towns Trust, of which I'm a trustee, decided to expand their programme of historic maps into Wales, the city of Swansea was an obvious place to start. Swansea has a population of nearly 250,000 people and was a major port and industrial centre until the middle of the 20th century. It's located on the south coast of Wales, about 45 miles west of Cardiff and right at the entrance to the historic Gower Peninsula, which was the first place in Britain to be declared an area of outstanding natural beauty back in 1956. Around the bay from Swansea City is the village of Mumbles, once a small hamlet whose workers quarried for limestone and fished for oysters, and now a bustling centre of shops and restaurants, surrounded by the waters of Swansea Bay and the beaches of the Gower. It also boasts the fine remains of a Norman castle, Oystermouth Castle, once the home of the Lords of the Gower. The remains of Swansea Castle are also still visible in the city centre, though it was smaller than Oystermouth, and very little of it now survives. Like most cities of the time, Swansea was a walled city, with stone walls surrounding the castle and its outer area, partly for defence, but also to mark out the borders of the city so that tolls and taxes could be charged when outsiders came in through one of the several gates to the city. In line with the usual process of embarking on a historical map, we had to decide which period of history would be represented on the map. Given Swansea's past, we decided on two main timeframes. Firstly, the medieval town and the visible traces left by the castle, the market, and the medieval street plan. And secondly, industrial Swansea from the late 18th century to about 1919. This was the period of Swansea's economic heyday, when it was a wealthy town full of rich industrialists who owned the copper works, which dominated world copper production throughout the 19th century. It was no wonder that Swansea was considered to be the capital of Wales. With industrial wealth came tourism, as visitors flocked to the seaside. A railway line installed to transport the limestone from Mumbles to the Swansea docks enabled visitors to enjoy the trip round the bay along the waterfront. One of the Mumbles' claims to fame is that from 1807, the very first fare-paying passenger railway in the world ran around Swansea Bay. It was horse-drawn at that stage, but nonetheless a huge novelty. Our map therefore shows the traces of medieval Swansea overlaid by its industrial streetscape as it would have looked in 1919. We included two smaller inset maps, one of the Mumbles, as you can see here, and one of the industrial valley along the River Tawe, since both these areas to the west and east of the city were responsible for Swansea's wealth and its rapid urban development. But there is another dimension to Swansea, as in the whole of Wales, and that is its bilingualism. As soon as the Trust decided to make a map of a Welsh city, we knew that it would have to be bilingual, to recognise the importance and indeed the legal status of Welsh as the first and oldest language of Wales, still spoken and used in daily life by over 500,000 people. As you might know, if you've seen any of the Historic Town Trust maps, space is at an absolute premium on all our maps. We try to squeeze in as much information as we can, but in the end, the size of the maps restricts the number of words and images we can include. It wasn't practical then to try and fit both Welsh and English text onto a single map. What we had to do was produce two maps, identical with regard to the actual cartography, but with all the written information in Welsh on one map and in English on the other map, as you can see here. It was only when we began to complete and edit the Welsh map that we realised that we had some difficult decisions to make. It wasn't as simple as just translating all the English text into Welsh, because the different audiences for each map require slightly different information. For example, in the gazetteer of the English map, that is all the printed information on the back of the map, we refer to the 13th century de Breuil's family, as you can see in the highlighted section at the top here. Firstly, the Earls of Warwick, and then in the 13th century, the de Breuil's family. But in the Welsh version, we simply say Teulu Gwilym Brewis, the family of William Breuils, since this Marcher lord is so well known in Welsh history. Similarly, a reference to non-conformist places of worship required the addition of the gloss chapels in the English version, whereas no such explanation was needed in the Welsh version. So at the top, we've got non-conformist places of worship, brackets chapels, a selection of which are listed below, but in the Welsh version, we simply have addoldau anghyd ffurfiol, non-conformist buildings. In the Welsh map, we added an explanation about the etymology of two Welsh street names, Stryd Caer and Stryd y Gwynt. Stryd Caer, literally Castle Street, was originally Car Street, from the English word cart, but it was changed to Caer Street in the 1800s because of its proximity to Swansea Castle. Stryd y Gwynt is better known in English as Wine Street, one of the oldest streets in the city. It's attested from 1567 as Wine Street and probably refers to the place where wine was traded in the city, but it was later known as Wind Street. When it was translated into Welsh, probably quite early, it was taken to refer to wind, perhaps because the street was windy, and was therefore translated literally as Stryd y Gwynt or Wine Street. This is one of the very few bilingual street names that still exists in Swansea today. But none of this explanation was required for the English map, so it was left out. It's simply here in the English version, as the name is recorded as Wine Street in 1567. But in the Welsh map, we include quite a lengthy explanation of the way in which the Welsh translation came about, Stryd y Gwynt, as a literal translation of wind rather than wine. This leads me to the issue of street names on the map, which took up a large amount of our thinking. Should we translate all of them into Welsh or not? We knew from our own experience of living in Swansea that Welsh speakers routinely insert English street names into their Welsh conversation. So a local Welsh speaker might say, for example, Mae hi'n byw yn Eaton Crescent. She lives in Eaton Crescent, without attempting to translate the street name. We were also conscious that we were producing a historical map, showing the streets as they were in about 1919. So we weren't trying to reproduce modern usage, but rather to give an idea of what the streets might have been called early in the last century. We also realized that this was the first time a map of a Welsh city had ever been produced in Welsh. So there were no precedents to follow and no conventions or guidelines to help us. We approached the officer for street naming and numbering at Swansea City Council, who provided us with some very useful information. Since 1996, there has been a council policy that all new street names should be either in English or in Welsh, but not both, and the council maintains an equal balance of English and Welsh names. Existing street names from before 1996 can be in both English and Welsh, and there are still some bilingual street names in Swansea on the street signs, though these are not as common as they are in other Welsh council areas. In the end, we formulated our own policy using the information we had available to us. So English street names that were in use in 1919 but have since disappeared remained as English names and aren't translated at all on the Welsh map. For streets that were there in 1919 and are still there today, we used Welsh forms where available, or simply translated those that could reasonably be translated. So we have Hale Caerfyrddin, Carmarthen Road, Stryd Rhydychen, Oxford Street, Stryd Gwir, Gower Street, Stryd yr Undeb, Union Street, Stryd y Berllan, Orchard Street, and Hale Walter, Walter Road. Streets that appeared after 1919, we've mainly left in English. And we added a short statement about our street naming policy. Here's a section of the map that shows a section of the Welsh map that shows some names in Welsh and some names left in English, like Park Street. So we added a statement to the Welsh map that sets out our policy on street names. This is what the statement says. It begins with ychydig iawn o dystiolaeth sydd wedi goroesi. Very little evidence about the use of Welsh street names in Swansea has survived since 1919. Since this is the first Welsh map of Swansea and the Mumbles, it was decided to adopt some Welsh street names for the map, while noting that these do not necessarily reflect historical usage in every case. So that's our disclaimer about street names. Although I led the team which produced the two Swansea maps, I was very dependent on the expertise of others. Gerald Gabb and Rob Anthony did most of the research for the map, with contributions from members of the Gower Society and the Oystermouth Historical Association. The research assistant was Ben Curtis, who was also responsible for the original Welsh translation, and Geraint Evans was the editor of the Welsh version. As ever, the cartographer for the Historic Towns Trust, Giles Darks, is the real architect of the map, and his beautiful design with its layers of colours and scripts, which you can see here in the legend included with the maps. His work makes each of our maps a work of art to be valued, as well as a window into the history of our ancient towns and cities. The Swansea map and all the Historic Towns Trust maps are available through any online bookshop or can be ordered through your local independent bookshop. The full list of maps is on the Trust website, shown here on the screen. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions, and you can email me at my University of Bristol address, which is here on the screen. Thank you very much for listening.